Chris Baranco here with my friend Ian Mills. It's a Friday night. We got a lot of snow coming this weekend. How's it going, Ian?
Pretty good. Pretty good. I'm excited for this episode. It's a little different than what we've done in the past, so we'll see how it goes.
Right, instead of covering a specific album or a specific show, we're covering an event. And that is the 1965 Newport Folk Festival, which the first words that probably come to your mind when you think of this festival are Bob Dylan. This is, of course, the festival that he went electric, but this was much more than just a random show that he crashed with an amplifier. It has a lot of other artists and a lot of other history attached to it. So we thought it would be a really good, fun segment to do. Ian, why don't you kick us off by telling us a little bit about it?
Yeah, so I think when people think of iconic music festivals, they might think of something that happened a couple years later of Woodstock 1969, like end of like the Summer of Love kind of era. But this one is like pretty close, if not better. I mean, we're a little biased, but in terms of the peak of the folk revival and a lot of the artists we're going to go over during this episode. There's a lot of gems here, even if you don't, if you put Bob Dylan aside. I This first came to mind for me when we were going over the Sarah Farrell album, talking about the Arthur Smith trio, and I saw on looking into their stuff that the Arthur Smith trio played this year of the Newport Folk Festival, along with a lot of artists coming out of not maybe not retirement, but playing again after a long time. So pretty jam packed set list and artists.
I definitely noticed there were a lot of artists who were nearing the end of their lives performing at the Newport Folk Festival in 1965. And I think that that is a good, um, I guess, like encapsulation of what the festival is because it's like the passing down of tradition of these folk songs, and it's not just folk music, it's blues music. And interesting enough, the Newport Folk Festival came out of the Newport Jazz Festival, which started several years earlier, because of young people's interest in reviving folk music, which is funny because that's not really something that we encounter today. Well, we have folk music, but it's more like singer-songwriter folk music. I wouldn't say young people are so much interested in, maybe I'm wrong, but in the traditional folk music in the sense of the Newport Festival. So interesting that at that time that was a hot commodity. That was a hot topic, was folk music. You know, you had the Greenwich Village scene, and then you had these older artists that were performing at the festival. And we'll get into some of those artists and who they were. Um, but yeah, also I wanted to touch on Newport versus Woodstock. That was an interesting comparison that you made. Woodstock, of course, was hundreds of thousands probably of people, at least thousands of people, whereas Newport was much smaller, and Woodstock was more like a generational, like, I guess they're both generational like moments, but Newport, I guess, spans like multiple generations. Well, Woodstock was probably like focused solely on that group of like the 1960s. Like, they're not baby boomers, right? I don't know what they are, but
Yeah, they would be, I think, because they would have
okay.
been born in like the 40s.
Yeah. So two very different vibes, but both iconic music festivals in the same decade. Just kind of interesting that they're so different. I didn't think to compare them, so I'm glad that you brought that up.
Yeah, and it's really because, and I didn't know this until I was looking at it for this episode. Alan Lomax was one of the people that put together this sort of run of Newport Folk Festival years, and he was involved with the Library of Congress and archiving a lot of these folk songs in the
Yes.
30s. And it was in part like his connections with some of these artists, like several decades before that, presumably they got brought in, or that they at least were contacted in doing this. Um, yeah, a lot of really interesting history, I think, and like you said, like a lot of these artists were primarily in like the 30s and 40s that are coming back a couple decades later to perform at this festival.
And that's what makes what Bob Dylan did so shocking and counterculture to the festival, because he's totally looking ahead and throwing aside um, kind of the folk traditions for the electric amplifier, kind of the pathway to a Woodstock in some sense. Um, so yeah, with all these people present at the festival and Alan Lomax, you have Bob Dylan coming in, just burning it all down with his electric guitar, which is so funny to say now. But we'll get into that. Ian, you sent over to me beforehand. I'm looking at it right now, the concert program, and we have some artists on there that are pretty familiar. Why don't you take us through kind of we're not going to go through every artist here. Honestly, it was hard to find a lot on Newport 65 without Bob Dylan being mentioned. It felt like every article I was coming across was like Bob Dylan and 1965 Newport. And I was like, stop, I just want to read about everyone else and what happened at the festival as a whole. So why don't you just take us through a little bit of the artists here and what you see?
Yeah, so this festival went over 4 days from Thursday to Sunday, July 22nd to 25th, 1965. And I figured the clearest way to do this is to just go by billing order. So Thursday night, opening night, um, 8 p.m. The first person on the billing order, or one of the first couple, is Reverend Gary Davis, who is our first of our several um, folk blues artists. He's also known as Blind Gary Davis. He was born blind. He was born in 1896, before the turn of the 20th century. Um, Gospel blues, transitioning into folk blues. Um, and I thought he was a good place to start because he was one that this sort of reinvigorated his career. But
Hmm.
before this, he had kind of settled down. He died. He would die 6 years after this show. But I think relevant to something maybe we know a little bit more about. It was his version of Samson and Delilah that Bob Weir learned the song, which I thought was pretty interesting. So Samson and Delilah, you know, traditional, biblical song. Um, but this was and had been recorded previously with other artists, but it was a specific version that Bob Weir learned it. And also similarly, he wrote "Death Don't Have No Mercy" as well, another song that showed up in the Grateful Dead Dead and Company canon. So definitely a very important artist, and the first one of these that sort of benefited, I think, from this show and this festival in a small way.
Yeah, I'm reading about him right now as you were talking. I was doing a little research on my end, and what I'm reading is that he was playing bass lines under finger-picked melodies. So he was also not only a great songwriter, it sounds like, but actually a very talented guitar player himself. From what I'm reading, of course, I never experienced Reverend Gary Davis myself, but yeah, really interesting, and that's a strong opener for the festival. I noticed on Thursday, July 22nd as well, Mabel Carter played, and that, of course, is the Carter family, another old time folk tradition or traditional band that performed at this festival. So pretty neat to see her on day one as well. And then I'll turn it back to you if you want to call out anyone else. I know, of course, we'll get to the headliner in just a moment.
Yeah. So the other person I want to highlight for this day is Son House, who's another blues singer. He was born in Mississippi. More of like a Delta blues artist. Um, Another one who primarily recorded in like the 20s and like late 20s and 30s. Um, and I thought it was very interesting that he had almost entirely fallen off the map. And it's funny how like a lot of these artists, a lot of these older blues guys, uh, have like a rediscovered section on their biography where he was rediscovered working at a train station in Rochester, New York, in 2 years before this festival, and was brought back in to tour the South and play the blues. So a lot of these guys were not even just like retired as we would think of it. They were like fully working other jobs before you know, a lot of these are from like the Alan Lomax sphere of archivists that kind of brought them back into play music again.
Yeah, that's incredible. That's what I was just about to say is it makes the work of Alan Lomax so incredibly important that what he did going out into the field, into the mountains, into the delta, everywhere recording this folk music and capturing these people for us because really they're just one in a long line of people before them and people that came after them, but primarily it's the people before them that I'm thinking of that will never record it because the technology wasn't there, the people weren't there to record it. That's what this folk music is. It's passed down from generation to generation. So really just we're blessed to have the work of Alan Lomax and some of the others that did it around that time as well. And really cool that they brought them back for the Newport Folk Festival and gave them an even bigger stage. And it makes sense that they were working other jobs. Like, of course, they weren't full-time musicians at that time. It was very different. So just really cool that they did that. And then the headliner of the night is Joan Baez with Donovan. Donovan is an English folk singer. Am I correct in that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I there's a 19 it might be 65 or sometime around them Bob Dylan documentary. I think it's either No Way Home or Don't Look Back or something like that. And there's like a rivalry in it between Bob Dylan and Donovan that I find is really funny. But Joan Baez, of course, we all know who she is. I have the songs that she played, um, but I was surprised it was only three. Maybe there were more, but it was Long Black Veil, Farewell Angelina, and It's All Over Now, Baby Blue. So I think at least two Dylan songs in that, which is funny that she's covering Dylan at the festival that Dylan breaks all the traditions. Just kind of neat.
Yeah, I didn't really look into set lists that much. But I think a lot of them were there's a lot of like mixing. Like it wasn't like as like organized to like a festival would be today where like you play 45 minutes and it's kind of
I
like a
see.
show. I think it was a lot of like sitting in, a lot of, multiple people up on the stage. So it could be that like those were the only songs she played individually and then, was joined by people or something like that. Um, because like I mean we'll get into it a little bit longer, but Bob Dylan played the day before he did his electric set. And he played acoustic. So it's a little bit more flexible.
Mm.
Yeah, it's pretty. I mean, pretty big headliner for the first night. Joan Baez is like obviously we're both big fans of hers. Super cool that she's still alive. And Bob too, I guess. But like yeah.
At least
Because
she's visible and like she's on social media and she's
yeah,
like
yeah,
doing
yeah,
things and
yeah.
like you can
Like
follow her
still, yeah.
career.
Um, because her career basically began at this festival. She played at the inaugural one, 7 year or not 6 years before this one, and before her first album was even out. And I believe she played every single year up until this one. Um, so someone who I think like truly embodied the folk nature, maybe in a little bit more of a pure way than Bob did.
In a pure way and also in a way that had solidarity with like the civil rights movement. Bob was involved with this as well, like the year before or 1963. They performed We Shall Overcome at the Newport Folk Festival, and then a month later performed it at Martin Luther King's March on Washington. So, yeah, it's interesting that the Newport Folk Festival was also a space for protest and for, you know, um, civil rights movement and uh, conscious driven folk music, not just like I don't know, Wildwood Flower or something like that by the Carter family, which I don't think has a deeper meaning than just, a flower in the mountains, but maybe I'm wrong. I could be totally wrong. So that's just a little note on Joan Baez as well, is that she was very pure folk music, but at the same time, like socially conscious, which is neat.
Yeah, and that's what I think a lot of, and we'll get into it with Bob. A lot of what like Pete Seeger was interested in his movement, and also this festival was like you said, trying to keep some of this what he felt was like this pure American music from becoming too corporate and too uh commercialized. Which is why it's interesting, like, and there's more to say on this when we get into Bob stuff, but like it's interesting because there's like one quote of him. um I guess we can just full go into Pete Seeger right now because he's also, so we're on Friday.
Okay.
The next day, Pete Seeger would be the next one up, so we can just go full into Pete Seeger. Um, that that he played, obviously like one of, I think can be considered like one of like the key activists in the folk movement.
Right.
Uh, Banjo player, American folk music, pervasive figure, uh, blacklisted in McCarthy era like anti-communist sentiment, um, and also was one of the ones that I think was central in getting this festival going, as sort of like a pro- with like a protective nature of this sort of folk music. Um, which is why, and part of it was like I don't want to be this music to kind of go the way of like Peter, Paul, and Mary, which is why I think it's funny that like they also played this festival. But I think it showed like how this was like sort of like a transitory era. Like it was a little bit inevitable as well. Um, for some of these artists that like for this festival was like more on the start of their career.
Yeah, Pete Seeger, it's funny because he played the song This Land Is Your Land, which is a popular song that he played throughout his career. But he played that at Newport 65. And today that song just seems so like jolly, almost like a children's song in some sense, like This Land Is Your Land, This Land Is My Land. But at that time, that was like a political song because it's like making a statement, like you said, like he was kind of like blacklisted for like that McCarthy era communism witch hunt, and like that song was like kind of stating like I guess public domain over like land, and just funny that a song that we think of now as probably being very innocent had some like actual charged meaning back then.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, like very specifically, like anti-capitalist, like anti,
yeah,
you know, stuff like
yeah.
that.
Right. Also on Friday, let me go back to the program here. We have Mississippi John Hurt, another blues singer,
Well, I was
who,
gonna say, like, before,
oh
we don't
yeah,
have to go into it too much, but Arthur Smith Trio, which we already went
right,
into a
right.
bit on this Air Frail episode. Just another one that like this is like a little before 20 years since like their big stuff, like with the Grand Ole Opry coming back to play. Okay, now we can
Yes.
do John Hurt.
No, no, it's fine. It's
No, that's all I had to say. I just want to get it. We keep like the order.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say John Hurt was someone who passed away a year later in November 2nd, 1966. So another person that he was born in 1893.
Yeah.
Came from this blues background. I'm assuming he was a Lomax recording that he brought back as well. And he worked as a farmhand. He sometimes worked for the railroad. On occasion, a medicine show would come through the area, but no one wanted to hire him. And he said that he couldn't just get away from home. He went through the Great Depression. I mean, he lived quite a life. So it's pretty neat that he kind of ended it here at the Newport Folk Festival. Um, and yeah, just another piece of history that was represented here. Just pretty neat.
Yeah, I think uh probably one of the most important artists in American history. Truly, I think
Mm,
uh one of the people that kind of brought in my mind is like one of the most important for like country blues, like this like sort of burgeoning blues genre that would become broader as it goes electric kind of around this time, I guess, but kind of merging country with Delta blues with folk to establish that genre. Um, One of the first ones I know that played Stagger Lee, played the recording of him playing Stagger Lee in the 20s. His version of Casey Jones is probably one of my favorite finger picking songs ever. It's just so good. And like this, like ha for this festival to kind of bring him back, like a lot of his stuff was in the 20s and 30s, and to get some of this recordings now in the 60s, like right before he died, I think it's like probably it just shows how important this sort of era was for folk music.
Yeah, definitely. You're pretty good, Ian, but we need to get big enough to bring like I had an old professor that taught a folk song class. I've mentioned it before. We need to get big enough to bring on like a music historian because I feel like I can't do it justice when I talk about like John Hurt um and I'm just saying like yeah, that's really cool and we get Peter Paul and Mary next. I am a big fan of their music. It's very like soothing, like the harmonies in their music and their songs. But I understand they were like very commercial, like and taking this folk music and just kind of popularizing it to the mainstream, which has its purpose and has its place. But probably much more commercial, built for the radio than some of the artists that are also playing at this festival.
Yeah, you know more than me. This is sort of this is the area where I feel like I'm on the other side of with more of the blues stuff.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. Um, I actually don't know the headliners for this Friday, which is probably bad, but Cape Breton singers, Cape Breton singers, and Larry Older. Do you have any info on those folks, or should we just
No, I
move
was
on to
looking up
Saturday?
before. I think the Cape Breton singers are like were like a folk. Like in this festival, there were some acts that were just like we're gonna get folk singers from this area, and then they're gonna perform, and it'll be like maybe like a little bit more of an educational thing. Um, so yeah, I was looking up to see if there's any band that uh was like that, and I couldn't find any. So like this is an island in Nova Scotia.
Hmm.
I think it was just getting some folk singers from there, but I might be entirely wrong. Um, but yeah,
Pretty sweet for them to be up there with some of these other folks if that's the case. But yeah, some people probably know more about it, so let us know. On to Saturday, we get what stands out to me is Lightning Hopkins. I believe
yeah.
he is a Texas blues icon. Do you have any info on Lightning to share with us?
Yeah. Did I miss Willie Dixon? Where's Willie Dixon in this?
I'm not seeing him on the list at all here.
Oh, it's interesting. I think that was maybe from a different source that I added him.
Hmm.
That's funny. I'll have to look into that. Never mind. So Lightning Hopkins. Um, another one. I mean, there's just so many. Um, it's funny, like kind of got one from everywhere. Um, Reverend Gary Davis was from South Carolina, Mississippi John Hurt from
Hmm.
Mississippi, Son House also Mississippi, Lightning Hopkins from Texas. Had a little bit broader, uh, slightly different like Texas blues with the country blues. He was someone who played like a little bit more electric. He would live for another 17 years after this. And obviously did like a little bit more electric stuff post mid 60s. Um,
Hmm.
Another one that was like very influential for the Dead, I think. Mojo Hand, not a specifically Lightning Hopkins reference, but I think in the Grateful Dead sense it was. Although
Right.
um, I think Pigpen probably knew about Mojo Hand as a reference, but that was one of his albums and songs, kind of more specifically. But yeah, like another blues great who had his time maybe a little bit more before the 60s. Well, I guess maybe he was 50s and 60s. That played this year.
All right. Then we get Bill Mon. Sorry, that was such a weak response. All right. I just don't have anything to add, but I think that's
Very
awesome.
good.
We got Bill Monroe, who's like the father of bluegrass music. Ian, you're a big bluegrass guy yourself.
Yep.
Bill Monroe, 1911 to 1996, lived a long time after this festival. Singer, mandolin player, and whose band, the Bluegrass Boys, essentially defined what we call bluegrass music. Um, he had sharp, piercing, emotionally raw sound to his voice. Um, and yeah, just really kind of neat that we're getting blues, folk, commercial like radio, pop folk, bluegrass music here at this festival. I mean, what an intersection of American music history this year specifically at the Newport Folk Festival. It's just fascinating. If I could go back in time, probably to any concert, I'm starting to think this might be the one after we talk more about it.
Yeah. So Bill Monroe is, yeah, like thinking of w- talking about like Delta blues and Texas blues and stuff like that. This is like coming from like a kind of like a different realm. Um, Bluegrass is so interesting to me because like this is like I feel like genre is kind of weird that like it's mostly after the fact like there people make the music and then there's like the various cultural pressures that shape it and then looking back like, you can see like okay this is like this genre, this is this genre. Bluegrass is slightly different because it's a little bit more defined, like coming out of like the Grand Ole Opry, Bill Monroe putting this band together and being the blue Bill Monroe and the Bluegrass Boys, and then being able to say like okay this genre is bluegrass, and if you play this type of music in the style of Bill Monroe and the Bluegrass Boys, it's called bluegrass. So I just think it's really interesting, because a lot of people think bluegrass is just like kind of like hick folk, guitar and stuff. It's like no, there's like a very like specific, and you look at them, they're all dressed
Mm.
up, they're wearing suits. Like I think it's just like an example of a genre where like you can very like clearly be like that it's either bluegrass or not because we know exactly what the template is. Um, so this is also something like bluegrass was having its own big uh not even revival, like it had existed but it was like right around this time they kind of took the boost from the folk revival broadly, and I think like the first bluegrass festival was like this year too, like a couple months later. So it's funny how it's like almost parallel to like this other folk revival that's happening.
So am I right to say then that like bluegrass music as a style and as a genre didn't really exist before Bill Monroe? I mean, I'm sure it existed, but
Um, yeah, well, that's where it's so there's also like Flatt and Scruggs and other artists that were playing similar. Like it was really like the late 40s through then. Like it
hmm,
wasn't like they formed and suddenly there's like this brand new thing.
okay,
But the way we think bluegrass now, I it is more direct towards Bill Monroe's band than anything else, I think.
cool. Thanks for clarifying. Yeah, that's pretty neat. All right, let's before we get to the big headliner and the iconic moment that defined Newport 1965, is there anyone that you want to call out on the set list for Sunday?
For Sunday, Peter, Paul, and Mary played again.
I noticed that. I figured we didn't have to go over them again.
No, I know. It's just like, oh, I wonder if they were just like the most paid and they're like, hey, like we're paying you the most. If we have an open slot, you have to go in. Um,
Probably.
yeah, no, it's interesting, like uh throughout, but like especially the last day, it's a lot of like I don't know, like what's the best way to say this? Like, um more like just like cultural acts. Like not necessarily like oh, this is an artist that tours in the US. It's more like, oh, this is like a folk tradition that we're gonna put on in the context of like you're gonna be here and hear all these folk traditions. So it's interesting to see the Shangji dance troupe, which is African dancers playing like close to top billing on the last night. It just and like dances throughout too, like on the other nights. Um, it just feels like pretty distinct than what you would get from a festival today.
Yeah, definitely. A whole different structure to the festival than a music festival today, as you pointed out earlier, with the shorter sets and the more sitting in and all of that. But let's talk about the big moment in Newport 1965, and that's Bob Dylan going electric. Heck, there's a recent movie about it with Timothy Chalamet. We all know about this moment in history. It's a defining moment in American music history. Um, but the reason it matters is because of everything that came beforehand. Bob Dylan was like the golden boy of folk music and the Newport Folk Festival. He played in 63, he played in 64 with Joan Baez. And in 65, he decides to reinvent himself completely. And what the, I guess, critics of him at the time, they valued like authenticity, but electric read as commercial, as rock and roll, as teen pop culture. Um, they wanted him to stay in this past traditions. Um, so it wasn't so much it was like really a lot of what came before in the history and context of like who Bob Dylan was playing at this festival before, and then he kind of sheds that for a new identity. We can get more into it, but do you have any like high level thoughts about this moment?
Um, it's just funny to hear like all the different takes. Like we kind of said in the beginning, like this was like a very, in many ways, probably like a transitory period in American music and folk music. Um,
Hmm.
I think just like the highest level, we take electric instruments for granted today, but like this is still like within 10 or 15 years of them even existing. I forget when like the like Esquire was like first invented, but I think it was like mid 50s.
Hmm.
Um I think part of this, and you know more than me, so maybe I'm a little off, but like part of this was like the Beatles were getting very popular. Um I think that was make more specifically for Bob was having this sort of like like strong force and like the pop music pop, I guess we consider it pop now, but that was like rock and roll, I guess. um
Hmm.
and like all the takes are just kind of funny, like Pete Seeger especially, like we can go into like all the different takes, like even for Pete, like he has like a very well documented remembering of this that like also might not be fully correct. So I don't know, like I'm sure this was very dramatic in 1965, but I just think it's very funny.
Yeah. Dylan played Maggie's Farm, Electric, Like a Rolling Stone, Electric, and It Takes a Lot to Laugh, It Takes a Train to Cry, Electric. And then he came back for two acoustic songs, but the damage was done. But he played It's All Over Now, Baby Blue, and Mr. Tambourine Man. Um, there was booing in the crowd, there was cheering in the crowd. It was just a lot of chaos. The sound was harsh and loud. That was what some firsthand accounts are saying. Like we couldn't hear a word of what he was saying. It was just harsh and loud because it's a folk festival. They weren't prepared for this.
Yeah.
So just the whole scene in general was just like imagine you're just sitting there having this nice relaxing time and then Bob Dylan just comes out and it's just blaring and it's just chaotic. It's just kind of funny.
Yeah. So like I think closer to our hearts, like phase contrast microphones hadn't been invented yet. So like the sound system is just kind of insane. Not really doing anything well. Um, the distortion just coming out of amplifiers from just turning them up like, like moderately high, is something that people try to emulate now. Like stuff is like too clean now. They try to add, distortion pedals to kind of get that sound again. But this was like when it was first coming out. Especially this crowd, Pete Seeger, I don't think actually has in the moment it seemed like there was a little bit of animosity, but it feels like it was pretty short-lived for him. But just like what he represented and what he was trying to do in terms of like trying to keep this sort of part of American culture like away from the the commercialization of everything. Um, to have this as sort of like the head, I don't know. It's just so iconic.
It is. Do you have any like quotes from Pete Seeger or any like
Well, he like I think the famous thing, is like he wrote a letter to Bob after, because like the famous thing is like, cut the cord with the axe, like
Yeah.
I'm gonna go out cut the cord, or I'll cut the cord with the axe, which has been said like a billion different ways. um Probably not true. um some I think some people said he said like, if I had an axe I'd chop the cable.
Hmm.
um I think he said on his end, he said like more kind of like abstractly, like cut the cable.
Yeah.
And then some people say that like someone had to be restrained from the stage because they had an axe and they were gonna cut the cable. Like there's just so many different levels of like of
Yeah.
how true this actually is. Um, and then of course like there's like cutting it because it just like physically sounded bad and they wanted it to stop, versus just like what it meant for the moment as well.
Right. We talked about the betrayal of it, Bob Dylan's changing identity with it, the chaos of the actual moment. But what also makes this moment so iconic is what it does for music moving forward. It cements Bob Dylan as a counterculture icon. It makes folk rock a real mainstream force, and it takes the idea that like serious songwriting can live inside rock bands. That someone like Bob Dylan, who's an excellent songwriter, can play this electric music. It did a lot for electric music and rock and roll moving forward. Um, Bob Dylan making this move to out of folk and into rock.
Yeah. No, it's pretty funny how like I can't think of any other artist that could pull it off like this, like Bob Dylan, especially because like part of it was being he got like upset the day before and he formed a band like that night to go do this.
Yeah,
Like just playing overnight, like try, to bring it out the next day. I don't know. It's so funny.
really is. Just a really neat festival in general. I think that's really all I had to say on it. Kind of culminating with Dylan there at the end. But like I said, if I could go back and experience, I think I'd still maybe pick like a peak Grateful Dead show. I would love to experience like Jerry Garcia like at his prime. But I think the Newport Folk Festival maybe would be my choice to go back and see because after we spoke about it today, just the amount of different eras and different music being represented, it's just a really cool cultural like apex.
Yeah, like even the Dylan stuff aside, just getting to see like John Hurt, and Son House, and White and Hopkins, and Reverend Gary Davis, some of whom were like literally just like found again, you know,
Hmm.
and able to play a little bit more at the end of their lives, contrasting with John Baez and Bob Dylan, who are at the very much the start of their careers, and are still playing today. It's just such like an interesting intersection.
Man, we're blessed to have some of these people still around and playing. Even if, again, Dylan hasn't stopped changing. He's not the same Bob Dylan that he was in 1965. I saw him in 2019 and the show was completely different. The song sounded completely different, but that's the whole point. Like, that's what Bob Dylan's gonna do. Um, and last thing, Ian, I think we should try and make a trip to Newport 2026. That's my saying here
Mm.
at the end, signing off.
Yeah, let's look into it.
Yeah, we'll look into it. Get a live old Moon Radio episode there. Try to interview some artists. John Craigie's played Newport before. He's an artist that Ian and
Yeah.
I like a lot.
Hmm.
A lot of modern artists have played the recent Newports, but uh, I don't think it's quite the same as it once was. But would love to see it for sure. Alrighty, Ian. Anything else before we sign off today?
No, let us know in the comments if we missed anyone big or underrated from this year. What would be the festival that you would go back to if you could go back to one?
I love that. Mine would be Firefly 2014. I went there.
Yeah.
Just kidding. Doesn't compare. Alrighty, well we'll sign off. Get ready for the snow here in Maryland, and we'll see you all next time on Old Moon Radio.